This is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Nazi general who was as respected as he was feared by Allied commanders. He earned his iconic nickname the Desert Fox during his time commanding forces in the North African campaign. He wasn't just a revered general, he was one of the few men to ever wield real influence over Hitler himself. By 1944, as the commander of the entirety of France's northern defences, Rommel was a significant threat to the Allies. If he could be assassinated, or better yet, captured alive, it could change the course of the entire war. This is the story of two men. One, a general near the very top of Nazi command, whose story has been at the centre of hundreds of books, documentaries and films. The other, an SAS commando with a mission so secret his name has barely touched the pages of a history book. Until now. This is Corporal Thomas Triplet Moore, one of 6 men to parachute into Nazi-occupied France in the summer of 1944, with an objective so bold it could reasonably be described as a suicide mission. We sat down with author and historian Damien Lewis, who recently uncovered new information about SAS stalwart Corporal Moore, which sheds new light on the little-known story of Operation Gaff, the plan to kill or kidnap the Desert Fox.
In the immediate aftermath of D-Day, SAS units were parachuted deep into Nazi-occupied France to sabotage and harass German transport and enemy lines to stop the forces of Nazi Germany getting their Panzer divisions and their armour and their key divisions to the Normandy beaches and driving the Allies back into the sea. That was the mission of the SAS.
One of these units was commanded by Bill Fraser. Operating from a secret base in the Morvan region, they had been incredibly successful in sabotaging and harassing Nazi forces following the Normandy landings. Fraser's unit often worked with the French resistance to carry out their objectives, and one of these resistance members happened to be a French noble who owned a chateau to the north of Paris.
And he told them, because he'd found out from his workers who still worked at that chateau, he told them, the neighbouring chateau to my own is the headquarters of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel.
The chateau was in the village of La Roche-Guyon, on the banks of the Seine, north of Paris. This was Rommel's headquarters, the location where he commanded and coordinated the defence of the entirety of northern France. And now the Allies knew about it.
Everybody in the SAS from the early days had personal beef with Rommel, because Rommel had commanded the Africa forces in the North African desert, who the SAS spent 18 months fighting in their behind enemy lines operations in North Africa. So when Bill Fraser found out the location of Rommel's headquarters, so he radioed London headquarters for permission. And basically, if Bill Fraser had been given the mission, he would have had to drive in their handful of jeeps they had there from the Morvan all the way across Nazi-occupied France to circumnavigate Paris to get to the chateau to kill or kidnap Erwin Rommel and then drive all the way back again. So probably around about 800 kilometres round trip. Bill Fraser was determined to do it and vowed that he could do it, but thankfully, I think, London headquarters said, no, you're doing a great job where you are with all your sabotage operations. We're going to stand up a bespoke team in London to parachute in and carry out the operation themselves. And Bill Fraser was deeply upset, but Fraser had to accept it. It was a bespoke operation set up from London, 6 individuals.
The commander of this elite unit was Raymond Carraud. Half French and half American, he had served in the French Foreign Legion before becoming entwined in the Marseille underworld, where he ran a people smuggling operation, helping over 2,000 refugees escape France. He later became involved in the SAS, where he took part in a number of assassinations and sabotage operations throughout the war. Now he was tasked with assembling a team to take on the Desert Fox. 4 of these men were also former French Foreign Legion, including a Russian named Fedosev and Max Mark, a German Jew. Corporal Tom Moore was the final man to round out the team, the only Englishman among them.
Tom Moore's grandson, Stephen, has been really helpful in me researching this story. And between us, we've tried to envisage why this one Englishman was chosen in this group that otherwise were, a band of international brothers in arms who clearly would all have been native French speakers, because you had to speak French in the Foreign Legion. It's the lingua franca of the French Foreign Legion. So why was Corporal Moore chosen? This Englishman who didn't speak French and, as far as we know, had no real experience in France. Well, we don't know, but what we do know is that when Corporal Moore deployed into the field on this operation, he made a very good account for himself.
The information on Rommel had been gathered by the staff at the chateau, so the intelligence on his daily movements was very detailed and gave the SAS a clear picture of Rommel's schedule. He would wake up early and have breakfast, then take his staff car to visit a position on the front line. He would arrive back at the chateau in time for lunch, and after eating, he would take a motorboat across the river to a forest on the far banks of the Seine. Here, he would hunt for around an hour or so before heading back. Dinner was around 6 p.m, and then between 7 and 9 he would sit out on the balcony of the chateau overlooking the river and enjoy a drink before bed. This gave the team of Operation Gaff two clear opportunities. If they were going to kidnap Rommel, the obvious place to do so would be in the forest whilst he was hunting, or they could assassinate him with a sniper rifle whilst he was exposed on the balcony.
There's only so much planning they could do in London, because if you think about it, until you get men on the ground and eyes on the ground and get your observation post set up and actually study what defences are in place, you do not know what guard forces are in place, what patrols are in place, which otherwise you might blunder onto as you're trying to execute the mission. So that was the key reason why they needed this team on the ground. And that team had to get in covertly, get themselves set up in observation posts, study the target, study his movement, study the defences, and then put their final plan of attack into operation.
The orders from London were very clear. It would be much better to kidnap Rommel, and killing him should only be a last resort if the kidnapping would surely fail. But even if they managed the almost impossible task of capturing Rommel alive, how on earth would they get him from the midst of Nazi-occupied France and back to London?
Well, the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, Churchill's Ministry for Ungentlemanly Warfare, the people set up to do all the things you're not allowed to do at war, assassinations, bribery, kidnapping, corruption, all that kind of stuff. They had perfected the means to drop agents into Nazi-occupied France and other occupied territories using the Lysander light aircraft. So they would fly in at night, low level, drop on an isolated French field, which had been made into a DIY airstrip, and then they could take agents out the same way. So the idea was, if they could kidnap Rommel, get him in a jeep, get him to one of these clandestine airstrips, get a Lysander radioed in, that was the way they would spirit him back to Britain. And the reason why kidnapping him was seen in London as being the ideal option was because, think of the propaganda coup. Not only would it be a game changer in terms of the Normandy landings, and bear in mind, at this stage of the war, so we're talking July 1944, the Normandy landings were bogged down and Allied commanders were very worried. So if you could take Rommel out of the equation, it would be a game changer. That was the sense of it. And that's why the orders for Operation Gaff, although in retrospect they do seem somewhat outrageous to kill or kidnap a German Field Marshal, they were signed off by Montgomery himself.
On the 25th of July 1944, the six-man team parachuted in, deep behind enemy lines. They were equipped with a variety of assassination and sabotage equipment, including sniper rifles and plastic explosives. Despite landing in the wrong location, they were able to quickly orient themselves and, undeterred, began trekking towards the chateau. But it wouldn't take long for the plan to completely fall apart. 3 days after landing, they made radio contact with London, and in doing so would receive some news that turned the entire mission on its head.
Because the intelligence the SAS gathered on Rommel's headquarters has been shared across the services, an RAF squadron has managed to carry out an airstrike on a staff car leaving that chateau headquarters, and it is Rommel's staff car. He's riding in it at the time. His driver is killed in the attack. The car hits a tree. Rommel is thrown clear, but in the process is very badly injured. So Erwin Rommel, the Field Marshal, their target, is in hospital. So their mission is suddenly null and void. Now, you might imagine at this stage they're rather relieved, because what by anyone's reckoning was pretty close to a suicide mission, they don't have to do anymore, so they can call it all off and come home. But they're not that calibre of individuals. Raymond Caraudas in particular is extremely annoyed. He was a very fiery individual. So instead, he decides they will launch a kind of freelance raiding and sabotage operation across that area of France to do the maximum harm they can. So in the next several days, they carry out 2 attacks on railroads. They derail 2 trains. One of those trains is stopped and derailed by Corporal Moore himself, alone, wielding a Bren machine gun. He shoots up the locomotive, stops it. Then they call in an airstrike, which blows it up. And they ambush several German convoys and kill several senior German officers, including a senior Gestapo officer.
Running low on supplies, the 6-man unit decided they can afford to execute one final attack before heading home. They settled on a field office near Rommel's headquarters as the target, with the hope that they would be able to take out some of Rommel's senior staff. Arriving at the location, the German Jew amongst them, Max Mark, was able to convince the sentry to open the gate for them. They were able to kill 4 Germans before retreating. In his final report on the operation, Commander Kuraud described this attack as a failure. However, he also states that the confusion they caused during the attack led to the Germans shooting at each other. 12 corpses were reportedly found the next day.
Now, of course, they're being hunted as never before, and they're pretty much out of ammunition. So Kuraud's response to that is to get a French gendarme's uniform, dress himself up as a French gendarme, get on a push bike, cycle across Nazi-occupied France, get to the German lines, bluff his way through the German lines, get to the American lines, hand over a large dossier of intelligence of all these targets that can be hit by airstrikes, and then to bring all of his men out alive. And all 6 of them get out without a scratch.
The 6-man team of Operation Gaff were able to make the most of their situation. Over a period of 18 days, they made their way through enemy territory, disrupting and sabotaging enemy lines, taking out Nazi officers and gathering vital information for future airstrikes. What started as an ambitious operation to capture Rommel became yet another SAS unit causing chaos behind enemy lines. Despite not achieving their objective, being unable to get close to Rommel, it's hard to consider Operation Gaff a failure.
Like so many of these individuals who came back from the Second World War, certainly those who served, on operations behind enemy lines, so many of them never spoke to their families about what they had done. And it's such a common refrain. Corporal Tom Moore was no different. He almost never spoke to any of them about what he had done. And, I think there's this myth, which needs debunking, that they didn't speak about it because of secrecy or because they were the stiff upper lip generation. It wasn't that at all. The truth is, most of them didn't speak about it because they were traumatized. They had what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. And when I met Stephen, he said to me, by the time I was old enough to appreciate who he was and what he'd really done as a member of the SAS, the little that we knew was too old to ask him any more questions because he'd passed away. And so then in discovering through working with me and the research I'd carried out what Operation Gaff had entailed, he was absolutely blown away. You can imagine it. Imagine finding out that's what your grandfather had been sent in to do, had been sent in to kill or kidnap Erwin Rommel, and not only that, had gone ahead to try and do so, knowing that your chances of coming back were so very, very low. That's an extraordinary thing.
In the weeks that followed Operation Gaff, Rommel was implicated in Operation Valkyrie, the plot to assassinate Hitler. He had become increasingly disillusioned with the Führer and his orders, often advocating for surrender in the interest of preventing unnecessary deaths. On Hitler's orders, he was forced to commit suicide by cyanide pill on October 14, 1944.
In talking to Stephen, Corporal Moore's grandson, he said, just think if that airstrike hadn't happened and they had gone ahead to try and kill or kidnap Rommel, because the chances were they probably would have all died, and then I would not be here, and how many other people would not be here. So in a sense, for those, the descendants of these individuals, that's, it turned out in the best way possible. And in terms of what the SAS set out to do, they achieved their mission to the best of their ability, with the circumstances they faced on the ground. So in SAS Daggers Drawn, I tell the full story of Operation Gaff. It is the third in the trilogy of wartime books I've written about the SAS, and you can find them in all good bookshops. Really, the books follow one SAS, so the first SAS regiment, founded by David Stirling, but then commanded by Blair Paddy Mayne. So it just follows that band of individuals, that band of brothers through the war.